Today I'll be going over Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. We'll be going over chapter 1, which is titled The Little Dutch Boy. Nash describes Breda, Holland as a beautiful and charming European town. She explains that it sits in Noord-Brabant, which is Holland's largest province, and was originally built as a fortress where two rivers meet. Breda is now a modern commercial and industrial city, but it still carries signs of its history through its old city walls and canals and ornate historic buildings. For example, one historic building in Breda, once connected to Van Gendeloos, is now an upscale men's clothing shop. It was almost torn down in the late 1980s, but was preserved because of its historical importance. This very old building, one of the city's oldest, is historically important because it was the birthplace of the man who later became Colonel Tom Parker. Nash points out the mix of history and modern life in Breda. Near the building where Parker was born, there's a record shop with an Elvis sticker in the window, marking the 20th anniversary of Elvis's death. Nash says Breda still feels deeply connected to its past. Its main square, the Groot Market, remains the center of town life, and it's surrounded by historic buildings and the impressive Gothic church, the Groot Kerk, many of which have been used for centuries. The Groot Kerk has overlooked the town for centuries, witnessing wars and conquest and changing rulers. Nearby stands Breda's old castle, tied to the city's darker religious history and political past. Today, it houses the I'm going to totally butcher these names. I'm so sorry. The Koninklijk Militaire Academy, or Royal Military Academy. Breda has a proud military history. It was known as an army city and housed the Royal Dutch Indian Army headquarters, and even played a role in René Descartes' life, where his time as a soldier helped spark his interest in mathematics. When Adam van Kalk was drafted into the Dutch army in 1887 and stationed in Breda, he was stepping into a respected military tradition that the city had long been proud of. Adam was born May 7, 1866, and came from a working-class family. His father was probably a fisherman. He grew up in Ramsdonksveer, which was a village 12 miles north of Breda. Adam van Kalk's family may have had noble roots going back to the Middle Ages, when the van Kalks were a wealthy ruling family that governed the town of Hoogstraten for over a century. When the region was divided and the southern part became part of Belgium, the Van Kalk family lost their power, and unable to keep their ruling position, they moved north to Breda. The Van Kalk family continued to believe that they had noble connections to the old rulers of Hoogstraten. Even if that claim was weak, they held on to a feeling of lost status and importance. Adam van Kalk enlisted in the Dutch army for 12 years, serving in an artillery unit that used horses to pull its guns. And during that time, Adam discovered he was naturally good with horses. After Adam left the army in 1899, he stayed in Breda and got a job handling horses and deliveries for Van Gendeloos, which was a major Dutch freight company that's similar to today's UPS. Even after 12 years in military uniform, he seemed proud to wear the company's formal uniform. Van Gendeloos operated from 66 Veemarkstra. It was a prestigious street in Breda, with stables for its delivery horses behind the building. There was an apartment above the stables for the liveryman and his family to live. Adam was about to start a family, but Nash describes him as a rather severe-looking. He was not especially handsome. He had a stern expression, sunken cheeks, intense dark eyes, and a noticeable family trait, a protruding left ear that he passed on to his first two children. Adam wasn't especially charming or attractive in personality either. He was strict, serious, and humorless. Even so, while he was still in the army, he began dating Maria Elizabeth Ponzi, who was 10 years younger than him. Born on September 2nd, 1876, into a family of lively independent merchants, also from Ramsdonksveer, Maria was the youngest of 8 children. Adam and Maria conceived a child around December 1899. Because they were strict Catholics in southern Holland, an unmarried pregnancy would have carried serious religious and social pressure. Because Maria was starting to show, the couple likely felt guilt and social pressure to do the proper thing. So Adam and Maria got married on May 10th, 1900. 4 months later, their son Josephus Andreas Johannes, nicknamed Seth, was born on September 19th. By the time their son Seth was born, Adam and Maria were living in the apartment above the stables. Maria's parents, Johannes and Maria Reinenberg Ponzi, also moved in with them as part of the marriage arrangement. The living space was very small and crowded. Adam and Maria slept in one room, and Maria's parents slept in another, and the loft would become the children's sleeping area. Maria's parents were very different from Adam, aside from being Catholic. They were lively traveling merchants who lived and worked on the waterways, selling and trading household goods from their barge. Today, the family remembers the Ponzis were resourceful merchants. Along with selling goods from their barge, they also had a small shop in Ramstonksveer called 1001 Things Bazaar, where they sold all kinds of practical items, including handmade funeral and religious supplies. The Ponzis were very clever and scrappy sellers. They even resold old church books by giving them new covers. But when their little shop didn't bring in enough money or bad weather kept them off the canals, Johannes took goods by horse and wagon to sell to nearby farmers. Nash says the Ponzis were restless by nature. Even though they tried to make a living through shops and selling goods, they preferred traveling from markets to fairs and blending into the lively world of street performers, music, and carnival-like crowds. When Adam and Maria got married, Maria's elderly father was sick, so her parents moved in with them. In return, they were expected to help care for baby Seth and any future children. The Van Kalk family grew quickly. Their daughter Adriana Maria, known as San, was born March 31st, 1902, and as the oldest girl, she would take on a motherly role with the younger children. Adam and Maria had another child the next year, a son named Johannes Wilhelmus, but tragically he died before he was 4 months old. Maria very soon became pregnant again, and on November 12, 1904, Maria Wilhelmina, known as Marie, was born. On July 22nd, 1906, daughter Johanna Huberdina, called Annika, was born, but unfortunately she too would die in infancy. The Van Kalks rushed to have another baby, and Petronella Johanna, known as Nell, was born on September 23rd, 1907. The family was understandably worried when their seventh child was born because they had already lost 2 babies. They named him Andreas Cornelis, honoring Adam's father and a family friend, Cornelis Roovers, who went with Adam to register the birth. The baby's birth record reads, quote, "In the year 1909, the 28th of June, has appeared before us civil servant of the county of Breda, Adam Van Kalk, age 33, profession, delivery man, residing in Breda, who gave notice of the fact that Maria Elizabeth Ponzi, without profession, residing in Breda, his wife, on the 26th of June of this year at 11 hours in the afternoon in this country, has given birth to a child of the male sex, which child will have the names of Andreas Cornelis. This notice has been given in the presence of Hendrikus Rogiers, age 26, profession, smith, and of Cornelis Roovers, age 22, profession, shoemaker, both residing within this county," end quote. The family was relieved because Andreas, who the family nicknamed Dries, was born healthy in their home above the stable. He had his mother's blue eyes and seemed strong and lively right away. Dries was especially cherished because he was the first son to survive in many years. His older sisters adored him and dressed him up and proudly took him on strolls around Breda's parks and historic convent area. Nash writes, quote, "As he grew to a toddler, Dries appeared to be a normal and even gregarious boy in every way. But as he got older, he displayed an unusual characteristic. He slept with his eyes open and was known as the family sleepwalker. The family had to lock the doors to keep him from venturing outside in the small hours of the morning. But even that did not always deter him. One day, a neighbor, Mrs. Van Overbeek, came to inform his mother that Dries had been standing in the street in the middle of the night, apparently asleep," end quote. So isn't that interesting? Parker used to sleepwalk, and so did Elvis when he was younger. Anyway, Dries took after his mother's Ponzi side more than his father's Van Kalk side. He inherited their humor, playfulness, optimism, imagination, and boldness, along with many of his mother's physical features. By the time he was a teen, he developed the fuller body type with thick hips and waist, which was common in the Ponzi family. Dries enjoyed visiting his grandfather because grandfather Ponzi brought excitement and humor into his life. He told lively stories about fairs, traveling merchants, and the thrill of charming people into buying things they didn't really need. Nash writes, quote, "It was all in the presentation grandfather Ponzi made clear. And if you had to be just a little cunning, if you sometimes had to trick people into thinking they needed something they didn't, well, everyone was the better for it," end quote. Dries' grandfather told him that the Ponzis had once been well off and refined, too. According to him, they came from France and lost their status during the Revolution and they fled to Holland, but they still saw themselves as elegant, well-mannered people who valued fine things. The stories about the Ponzi's refined past made a strong impression on Dries. According to his sister Marie, Dries was very keen on his looks, and he paid a lot of attention to his clothes. When he got a little older, he would really dress up. He was a gentleman, but he could look down on people a little bit. He thought he was just better. Young Dries was pulled between two very different worlds. His grandfather's exciting stories of travel, freedom, and style and importance, and his father's strict world of discipline, duty, and rules. Adam wanted Dries to follow a stable, disciplined path like the military, partly because it would mean steady work, but Dries was independent and did not like being told what to do, so the soldier's life didn't appeal to him. In Adam's world, fathers and priests held strict authority. Because Adam was stern, humble, and not indulgent with his children, conflict with the free-spirited Dries was bound to happen. Adam was deeply religious and made sure Dries followed Catholic routines too, even though Dries resisted. He even had Dries serve at Mass while the family attended local churches in Breda, especially St. Joseph Kirk and Antonius Kirk. Church records show the Van Kalk children were raised as practicing Catholics. Between 1916 and 1924, they fulfilled their expected religious duties, including receiving Holy Communion and being confirmed. Adam's faith became even more important because he was seriously ill. When Dries was about 6, Adam developed diabetes and kidney problems, so he relied on young Dries to help with the horses and deliveries in order to save his own strength. Dries loved animals like his father did, but he didn't have Adam's discipline. One time, after taking the horses to the blacksmith, Dries simply let them loose on the way back to see if they could find their own way home. This did not help his father's health. Adam remained disciplined and hardworking despite being sick. He still got up before dawn, prepared the horses, made deliveries for hours, and only then came home for breakfast. If he came home after working early and found Dries still asleep, he would get angry and pull him out of bed and beat him with a stick kept for punishing, quote, bad children. Marie, Adam's favorite child, remembers, when they had done serious wrong, they got serious punishment. Our parents wanted the boys to have a better job than our father had, to make easier money and not have to work so hard. The Van Kalks were poor, but they still saw themselves as respectable. Marie took pride in her daughters working for elite Breda families because it reflected well on their own status. Even though it was odd for a poor family to have a maid, the Van Kalks had one, and Maria justified it by clinging to the idea that both sides of the family had once been aristocratic. Some later accusations painted Maria as status conscious and demanding. According to those claims, she pushed Adam to work extra jobs so the family could afford small luxuries and Catholic schooling for the children. She likely saw Adam's side jobs as normal because her own family had always hustled and traded to make extra money. And with more children being born, the family needed the income. Angelina Francina, called Lean, was born November 13th, 1910. Then Adam Franciscus, or Odd, on September 21st, 1913. The last 2 children born were named in honor of those who died. Johanna, born May 8th, 1916, and Johannes, or Jan, on October 1st, 1918. By the end, Adam and Maria had 11 children total, 9 of whom survived. Maria always managed to make sure everyone had basic bedding. Adam also helped by doing extra work at an auction house and accepting an unsold bed as payment. Maria was very strict about who her children associated with. She didn't allow them to play with Protestant children or families she considered beneath them, and she also banned them from going into the music hall next door. Maria may have worried that her daughter Marie was too attracted to music and fun and freedom. She would later convince Marie toward becoming a Franciscan nun. This might have reflected Maria's own unhappy feelings about marriage after being forced into it by circumstance. Marie, who spent 18 years at the convent, said, "I was never happy at the convent, and I told my mother I wanted to leave there, but she said it was probably best that I stay." Maria would eventually have high expectations for Dries, but while he was still young, she wanted him to enjoy being a child. She even argued with Adam when she felt he made Dries spend too much time working in the stables. By the time he was 7 years old, Dries was already independent and adventurous. He would sneak off with friends C's Fritters and Carl Resin to explore Breda and to visit his grandfather, whose stories fed his imagination and love of fantasy. He'd be told about the small favors and village markets, and Dries became even more excited for Kermis, which was Breda's big annual fair. Kermis was a lively week of tents, games, rides, treats, drinking and laughter, and loosened rules. It was an escape from the town's usual strict Catholic restraint. The children found clever little ways to make money so they could buy special treats and go on rides or attractions and play carnival games. Nash writes, quote, Dries was no exception, and using the techniques his grandfather taught him, he hustled a few guilders whenever the opportunity arose, mostly trading or running errands. To Dries, Kermis was a nearly delirious escape from the glum world of his father and the nonsense of school. Nash writes, quote, Dries was no exception, and using the techniques his father taught him, he hustled a few guilders whenever the opportunity arose, mostly trading or running errands. To Dries, Kermis was a nearly delirious escape from the glum world of his father and the nonsense of school. Apart from the circus, which brought the clowns and larger animals like elephants to the Gasthuisvelden, Kermis was the child's favorite thing in all the world. When either was in town, the boy would vanish before daylight and not come home until the moon shone bright in the sky. End quote. Nash says Dries' love for the fair became almost an obsession. His parents wanted him to focus on school instead of chasing temporary thrills, but he ignored them. He even secretly skipped school during Kermis so he could be the first in line for the merry-go-round ride, which was free on the first round. He loved the excitement of getting a free ride, but he soon realized working at the fair and getting paid was even better. By age 9, he had become a young carnival worker, what Americans might call a, quote, carny. His involvement with the fair began with small trades. He helped a vendor build a booth in exchange for a candied apple, then started helping workers set up tents in exchange for free admission. Maria tried to stop Dries from getting too involved with the fair, especially with more dangerous work like building stands, but she couldn't stop his ambition completely. He found another job promoting the fair around Breda, bicycling through town with a sandwich board sign. Then he went on to small jobs like carrying water for clowns. Then he worked his way into caring for and feeding the animals. And when he was a little older, he was a barker. Parker once said, I worked for a gypsy and stood in front of her tent. I waved my cane and called to people who passed by. Have your fortunes told for 50 cents. I would get to keep 25 cents. Then one day he told a fortune himself and pocketed the entire 50 cents. Nash writes, quote, with that marriage of commerce and con and the promotional, marketing, and image-making tricks he was starting to pick up about how to sell a show, the spirit of Tom Parker was beginning to take form in the body of young Dries van Kalk. Everything that he would ever be would have its genesis in Breda, in the swirl of noise and color and excitement of the fairgrounds and the circus, and in his search for the biggest attraction of all. That quest would ultimately end with a kid from South Memphis in Tennessee in another land far across the ocean. End quote. Even as a child, Dries was beginning to show traits that would define him later. He preferred scheming and hustling over straightforward work, and he seemed to take pride in tricking people as if it were a kind of talent. He could still be generous, but only on his own terms. He didn't like being pressured or asked for help, and when he gave, it had to feel like his idea, and ideally using someone else's money. If that wasn't possible, he would try to get companies to donate free goods, then hand them out so he looked kind and important. This habit later showed up in his Santa Claus act, where he gave candy to children, and he enjoyed the attention that came with it. It all originated in Holland. Dries showed his mischievous, entitled streak early on, too. A farmer from the village of Teeteringen regularly came to the family stables. He would collect horse manure in exchange for fresh straw and hay. One day, Dries simply took the man's bicycle to visit his friend, leaving the farmer stranded. He didn't just take the bike, he turned it into a whole scheme. He and his friend Cees planned to ride to another farmer's place in Teeteringen, where Dries would pretend to be a foreign boy from England, using made-up English and French, and hoping the farmer would give them free apples out of kindness. Dries' little con succeeded. He and Cees got the free apples, then took their, quote, loot, and rode over to the orphanage in Teeteringen. Angelina said, the orphans stood in a row of 12, and Dries gave them each an apple. Then Dries took the rest home to his mother. Adam was furious that Dries had taken the farmer's bicycle, so he punished him by sending him to bed without dinner and gave Dries' meal to the farmer instead. But Maria, pleased that Dries had brought home fruit for the family, secretly gave him a sandwich later. It was something that she often did when Adam punished him. Angelita's daughter, Mickey Dons Maas, said, he would scheme, but always in a good way. Some people might have thought he was a terrible guy, but others had to laugh because they had fun with him. Dries was always driven by fun and imagination. Even as a child, he was clever and entertaining, using stories to make ordinary days exciting, so much so that his siblings actually looked forward to bedtime. Mickey Dawn's Mass remembers her mom telling her, "They all slept in the loft, the boys on one side and the girls on the other, with a door and some curtains separating them. They'd get ready for sleep and lay in their beds, and the girls would call out, 'Okay, Dries, tell.' And Dries would open the door and tell his stories. He was unique in all the family." His sister Nell would remember, "He never hurt anyone, but he was always up to something. He did everything that the others didn't dare." Dries loved being the center of attention, and when his father was away, he would break the rules by turning the forbidden stables into a playground, and would lead the other children in games and making himself the star of the show. When the children got bored, he climbed up near the hay silos and slid down the large copper pipe like it was part of an adventure. He loved performing and showing off. His grand finale was daring and risky. He would balance and do tricks on the horses' backs, even jumping onto the most difficult stallion that the others avoided. He was fearless around animals, and by age 7, he was putting on little shows and charging people to watch. And he often brought animals into the family's living space, letting them run around freely. But one day, he acted impulsively and sold the family goat for 1 guilder and free tickets to the circus. He got a beating for that. As Dries got older, he became harder for his father to control. His bold and rebellious behavior kept causing trouble, and Adam responded with punishments that seemed harsher than necessary. The breaking point was when Dries became involved with a small local circus that was run by the Van Bever family, and that wasn't very impressive compared to the bigger European shows. But it gave him steady seasonal work, and more importantly, it captured his imagination because Madame Van Bever was a talented horse trainer who wanted to build a beautiful act with Lipizzaner stallions. Dries was inspired by the circus horses. After seeing how elegant and exciting Madame Van Bever's trained stallions were, he started wondering why he couldn't teach his father's ordinary work horses to perform tricks too. Sundays in his father's stables were usually boring for Dries, so he used the quiet time for secret mischief. He would lay blankets on the floor to soften the sound of the horses' hooves, and hoping that his mother upstairs wouldn't hear what he was doing. He told his siblings he'd have a surprise for them in a few weeks as long as they left him alone in the stables. Dries trained his father's workhorses to perform circus-style tricks. He practiced until he could stand with 1 foot on each horse as they trotted in a circle, copying the kind of act he admired at the circus. One Sunday, he finally revealed the secret horse act he had been practicing. He gathered his siblings and a few neighborhood children like an audience, then confidently brought several large horses out of their stalls, 4 in total, for the performance. Acting like a ringmaster, he used his father's whip to command the old workhorses, and they suddenly performed as if they were elegant trained circus horses. Just as Dries was bringing the horses to a kneel and curtsy, Adam burst in and was furious. To Dries, it had been a thrilling little circus act, but to Adam, it was dangerous and reckless because those horses were the family's livelihood. If the company found out, Adam could lose his job, their housing, and his good reputation. Adam shouted, "Andreas Van Kelk, you will never amount to anything." Adam was so furious that he decided to punish Dries in front of everyone. He took off his heavy belt and prepared to whip him severely, hoping it would scare the circus dreams and rebellious behavior out of him for good. Nash writes, quote, "The story of Adam's beating the boy while the others watched would go a long way to explain the origin of a third key trait that showed up in Dries' personality in adulthood: his need to humiliate others around him, especially those in subordinate positions. Whether the story of the horses is rooted in truth, some of the siblings believe it to be a fabrication. Certainly, the boy's relationship with his stern, authoritarian father left a scar on his psychological makeup. With his mother, who nurtured and forgave him, he could be himself. But his father made him feel only like an unlovable failure." End quote. Because Dries couldn't escape his harsh home life yet, he learned to emotionally toughen himself. He began hiding his softer feelings and acting strong and pretending everything was fine even when he was hurt. Dries also learned to separate different parts of himself. At home, he acted one way, but away from home, he was someone else. He learned to carefully control how people saw him. He showed different sides of himself depending on the situation, hiding anything he didn't want revealed, and in that way, he became hard to read, stubborn, and unyielding, much like his father. Dries had always been secretive even as a little boy, but after his painful clashes at home, that secrecy grew stronger even with his mother. Maria had given each child their own drawer and a large cabinet where they could keep little personal belongings or treasures. And Galina remembers, "You could close the drawer, but my brothers had a lock on it so that nobody could get into it." Maria recalls, Our mother was clever. She drew out all the drawers so that she could get in and discover all our secrets. This resulted in Dries believing that no one could be trusted. Because Dries didn't feel seen or respected at home, he looked for that attention elsewhere. At school, he earned admiration from other kids by showing off or misbehaving. Maria could have sent Dries to a free school for poor children, but her pride and religious values pushed her to pay for a Catholic boys' school instead of St. Antonius Shoe. She wanted him educated in a more respectable setting, even though money was tight. He struggled right away with the school's strict discipline. The friars enforced rules harshly, sometimes cruelly, using punishments like whipping students with a strap. Dries was the class clown and often got in trouble for challenging the teachers. When he failed an exam and was too scared to show his father, he forged Adam's signature, but got caught. The friars punished him harshly by forcing him to kneel painfully in wooden shoes until he couldn't bear the pain any longer. Even after Dries was moved to a public school, he still didn't behave or settle down. He skipped school often and spent his time going on adventures, watching ships, visiting relatives on boats, exploring old military sites, or heading to nearby towns whenever a circus or fair was around. By age 11, Dries already felt trapped and wanted to get away from Breda and his family. He tried to run away by sneaking onto a train to Rotterdam, but he was caught and sent back to his father. His formal schooling ended after a prank. He mocked a teacher who had an unusually large nose by writing, "Long live the nose," on the blackboard, and the furious teacher expelled him immediately. Nash says that Dries probably would have left school soon anyway. After leaving school, Dries helped his father with work for a time. By then, Adam's health had gotten much worse. Along with diabetes, he had lung issues, rheumatism, and swollen feet that made his delivery work difficult. But after Dries hurt his hand while working on a heavy coach and being rushed to the hospital, he was no longer able to assist Adam. Dries started out with very humble jobs after leaving the stables. He carried luggage at the train station, worked briefly as a grocery delivery boy, but soon he lost that job. Then he moved on to a jam factory where his brother Seth had worked before. Those food-related jobs should have appealed to Dries because he loved food and valued it so much. But even with that perk, he found the work dull and unexciting. He was much more drawn to lively show business type work than ordinary jobs. When a performing dog show came to town, he preferred that kind of temporary work because it felt closer to the circus world he loved, entertaining, unusual, and full of tricks. He got to feed and groom the performing dogs and was paid 5 guilders for it, but even more importantly, he got to learn how they were trained. He found steady work selling and checking tickets on a trolley route, but the job was cold and uncomfortable. After dealing with the harsh wind for a while, he decided he didn't want to do it anymore. He finally found a job that suited him better when he worked for a kind barber and his wife who had no children. They paid him 10 cents a day and they treated him like a son and tolerated his mischievous behavior, like when he would get distracted by street music and would run out leaving the client with shampoo in their hair, or when he played pranks on customers, allowing them to walk out with only half their face shaved. Nash writes, quote, "Despite such behavior, the barber and his wife wanted to adopt the teenager and bring him into the business full time. Maria didn't like the idea of her son living elsewhere, but with Dries' combative attitude towards his father, she advised him to take advantage of his opportunity. In the end, however, Dries wasn't interested. He wanted only to be his own boss, to make his money on his own time, in his own way, and he harbored resentment toward those who had, quote, made it, end quote." His sister Marie said, "Possessing money was very important for him. The family knew one rule for sure, quote, don't touch his wallet," end quote. Dries loved buying nice clothes. Angelina said he cared a lot about how he looked, and Marie remembers, "If mother didn't iron his collar properly, he would throw it away and not wear it." At 16, Dries wanted to seem more grown up and respectable, so he asked to be called Andre instead of Dries. But he still kept himself apart from others and had few close friendships and avoided drinking after realizing beer brought out a violent side in him. Later in life, he would only drink half a bottle of beer in social settings. Joe Esposito remembers, "He would never drink a complete beer. He told me, 'I can't drink. I completely change when I drink. My personality does. I get very mean.'" As a teenager, Andre showed little to no interest in romance or relationships with girls. Marie said, "I'm sure that by the time he was 17, he still had not been with the girl. He had no sexual interest whatsoever." Nash writes, quote, "While that may have been normal for the culture of the times, the boy may have also felt trapped by the dangers of dependency. But whether he was truly asexual or if there was perhaps some sexual squeamishness among several of the Van Calk children, Marie volunteers that she and her husband lived as brother and sister for 53 years, Marie says she can't imagine why her brother eventually married unless it was to be cared for, end quote. Andre was focused less on romance and more on escape. His circus and dog show work had made him crave adventure outside Breda, and he wanted freedom from his family's control and the strict rules of the church. He began dreaming out loud to his siblings about leaving Breda for Rotterdam. He imagined working at the harbor, hearing sailor stories from around the world, and staying with his uncle Jan Ponsi, Maria's brother, while he chased a bigger, freer life. Rotterdam wasn't very far away, about 25 or 30 miles, but to Maria, it felt like a painful separation from her son. She was already a fearful, deeply religious woman she was easily frightened by the sound of thunder, and anything she saw as evil, even the warnings of fortune tellers. Maria was already anxious and afraid because a quote, naturopath had recently predicted Adam would die soon. And now, late spring of 1925, he was seriously ill in the hospital. With 2 younger children away at boarding school, the thought of Dries leaving for Rotterdam felt especially painful and overwhelming for her. But once Dries decided to leave, nothing Maria said could stop him. She only asked him to get his father's permission first, but even Adam could see Dries was determined, and being too sick to fight it, he accepted that he couldn't stop him. Andre left the hospital and visited his sister Marie at the convent and told her about his plan to move to Rotterdam. He believed his uncle's shipping office job could help him get started there and begin a new life away from Breda. Marie remembers, "He came to say hello and goodbye, not just to me, but also to a rector in the convent. Dries had been a mass server with this priest when he was little." Nash writes, quote, "When Marie had her formal admission ceremony that August, a very proud day for a family in a country where everyone does his best to honor birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, and graduations, Dries was the only one not to attend. By that time, Andre was a regular on the foggy docks of Rotterdam, watching the great ships pull out to exotic ports and searching for his destiny," end quote. That's it for Chapter 1. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, which is titled Behavior Most Strange. See you then.